Well, thank you everyone for joining us on this Friday afternoon on Near and Rupar. I am David Near, publisher of the Downballot. My co-host Aaron Rupar is publisher of Public Notice. And this week we're extremely excited to be joined by fellow Substacker Dan Shafer of the Recombobulation Area, a fantastic newsletter with a bit of a mouthful of a name devoted to Wisconsin politics. You can find the Recombobulation Area on the Substack app. It's also the recombobulationarea.news. And Dan, we are so thrilled to have you on because I'm not sure if there's any swing state that is swingier than Wisconsin. You guys always have the craziest, wildest, and closest elections. So thank you so much for coming on Near and Rupar today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, we do have a rather discombobulating politics in the state of Wisconsin. So we all need a place to come recombobulate. That's hopefully what I can bring a little bit of at the Recombobulation Area.
I mean, I love that. And also, that's not a name that anyone is going to mix up with any other site.
That's right. It is a Milwaukee specific thing. It is named after the famous post security spot in the Milwaukee airport. They have signs up that say the Recombobulation Area, where you get your things back together after you go through security. And it is a only in Milwaukee place. So I always loved the word. I always loved that it was only in Milwaukee thing. And so it took the name for it for my political blog once I got it started a few years back.
I had been wondering, and that's a fantastic explanation. So let's dive right in. You've got a ton of elections on the calendar in Wisconsin coming up next year throughout the calendar, not just in November. But the one that is probably at the top of everyone's mind in Wisconsin, and I'm sure elsewhere too, is the race for governor. Democrat Tony Evers has served 2 terms ever since he ousted Scott Walker in an extraordinary upset in 2018. And he's allowed to run for a 3rd term. A lot of states limit their governors to running for just 2 consecutive terms. Evers could conceivably run for a 3rd term. He said he would decide around now. But you wrote a piece with a really thoughtful argument recently suggesting that he ought to step aside. And so I would love to hear about your thoughts on that, because we're in this moment where a lot of folks in the Democratic Party are really eager to see a new generation of leadership arise.
Yeah, you're right. So basically, just to give you a little more of the context on kind of the decision that the governor is making here, he said that he would make his decision after the state budget process was completed. Well, he signed the state budget into law on late in the night last week, Thursday, and so now the decision is looming over state politics, and we don't know yet which direction the governor is going to go. But like you said, I made an argument recently at the Recombobulation Area that Evers should pass the torch and not seek a 3rd term in office. Evers is 73 now. He'll be 75 in November of 2026 when he would be on the ballot if he is running for re-election. And I think, given everything that has happened with Joe Biden last year in national politics, and I think just a larger issue that Democrats have faced in their inability to pass the torch when the time is right. I mean, I don't know how many more examples we need of this in recent memory in our politics. And so I think the Democratic bench in Wisconsin is a pretty strong one. And I think now would be the right time for Evers to pass the torch to a next generation of leaders. And like you said, I think there is a real appetite out there among Democratic voters to have to really pass the torch to the next generation of leaders. And I think addressing that in Wisconsin by Evers passing the torch would be a really symbolic way to do that, because like you said, what happens in Wisconsin can really reverberate nationally in our politics. So if Evers, in his mid-70s decides not to run for a 3rd term in office, I think that could be a sign to Democrats around the country that it's time to take this generational shift moment a little bit more seriously. And the example that I used to really drive this point home was the example of Herb Kohl, former senator, the late Herb Kohl, longtime senator in the state of Wisconsin. In May of 2011, he announced that he would be stepping aside. He would not be running for another 6-year term. He was 76 at the time, and that was coming right off of the 2010 midterms where Democrats got shellacked. So there was no guarantee that a Democrat would be able to hold that seat. But Herb Kohl said, that it is time to step aside, and the seat is, making allusions to saying the seat is bigger than me, all of that, and ultimately Tammy Baldwin won that election in 2012. The torch was successfully passed, and she's now serving in her third term in the U.S. Senate. So I think, does Tony Evers want his legacy to be like that of Herb Kohl, who successfully passed the torch and got to spend his golden years leading the Bucks Milwaukee Bucks championship parade through the city of Milwaukee in 2021 as the former owner of the team, or do you want your golden years spent perhaps answering questions about whether you were too old to be in office and
Yeah.
all the questions that came with that? So that's really kind of the larger argument that I made in that piece. There's a lot of other connected things about like kind of looking at the dynamics of 2026 and all that may entail. But I think, grappling with what happened with Joe Biden, recognizing this generational shift moment, and just recognizing that he could have a pretty strong legacy as a two-term governor who defeated Scott Walker and passed the torch at the right time. I think that would really speak volumes in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and say, Dan, it's a really tremendous piece. It's almost kind of like magazine length. You really lay it out. I mean, from not only the arguments surrounding Joe Biden, and you kind of get deep into, not just kind of the superficial aspects of, Biden old, we all understood that, but, how it really hurt the party, and how, one of the arguments that you made in there that really sticks with me is that, had Biden not ultimately stepped aside for Kamala Harris, I mean, that could have been it for Tammy Baldwin, given how narrow the margin was last year. And so I think that's kind of I think there's kind of a tendency, and you bring up some of the discourse surrounding Biden that we see now on the internet, and there is kind of this reassessment from some of his defenders that because Kamala Harris lost, maybe had he stayed in, could he have won ultimately? But I think, there's not enough attention maybe paid to the flip side of that argument, which is had he stayed in, it could have been an even worse disaster, which would have led to an even worse margin in the Senate. Baldwin's seat kind of chief among them as ones that could have gone Republican, and in the House as well. But I wanted to ask, as a Minnesotan, I keep kind of an eye on Wisconsin politics, but, the times that I've encountered Tony Evers, whether it's in work that I do clipping, you also mentioned in your piece his brief remarks at the DNC last year. I think he had a flub. You kind of cite that as an example of him not being an especially charismatic politician. But, what is kind of the secret sauce for him where he's been so successful? You mentioned defeating Scott Walker and, now considering a third term. For people like me who are just kind of tuning in and seeing sort of the optics of Tony Evers, what are we missing?
Yeah, so I think another point that I made in the piece is that my issue with Evers is not really an ideological or policy-based disagreement in large part. I mean, there are certain things here and there that I might disagree with him on, but I think he's been a good governor for 2 terms. And I think he's, really been able to, kind of keep some of the rural voters that have been drifting away from Democrats, keeping them within the Democratic coalition in Wisconsin, while really expanding margins in Dane County. And I think, he lost some ground in Milwaukee in particular, going from 2018 to 2022. But overall, he won by a larger margin in his reelection than he did when he defeated Scott Walker. And so I think he's been more of a moderate governor. He's talked about how and he's never been really known as a kind of sparkling orator in any way. He's just kind of this mild-mannered former science teacher who was the state superintendent and is has been a pretty successful governor. But he's been really his success has really come from playing defense a lot in Wisconsin. And I think Ben Wickler said to me in an interview that Tony Evers' veto pen is one of the most important collections of atoms in the country in defense of democracy. And I totally agree with that. He has really held back a lot of the real crazy coming from the right in Wisconsin. And so I think, one of the things that Evers said when he was reelected is that boring wins. He's not a real flashy guy. He really embodies Wisconsin in a lot of ways. And so I just think that has been successful for him. But he's not going to be governor forever, right? And so I think it's just incumbent upon leaders who are of the age that Evers is, and if he were to be reelected, he'd be among like the 2 or 3 oldest governors in the country. He's right now the 7th oldest governor at age of 73, and most of those older than him are term limited. So I think it is, it's just you see across the board. I don't know how many more signs that we need that Democrats need to really have serious conversations about passing the torch.
So if I'm hearing you right, what needs to happen is that Giannis needs to promise to win a championship and let Tony Evers lead the parade.
That's right.
Giannis.
That's right. We need to have another Bucks championship, and then Tony Evers can lead that parade. You're right. Yeah.
So we talked about Tammy Baldwin, who I think by all rights has been a fantastic senator. Who do you see as the next Tammy Baldwins in that generation who could possibly succeed Evers if he were to step aside?
Yeah, I think, the Democratic bench in Wisconsin wasn't always particularly strong. Scott Walker getting reelected, whatever, all the kind of wins that Republicans were able to stack up throughout much of the 2010s. But I think Democrats have, under Ben Wickler's leadership for the state party, have really, yes, I'm going to lean into it here, have recombobulated over the past few years. And I think there are a pretty strong group of candidates, a few people who would run for Senate a couple of years ago against Ron Johnson. But I think more broadly, I think you've got a number of Democrats who would jump into the race if the opportunity presented itself. So I think you've got Attorney General Josh Kaul, who has won 2 statewide races. So he's going to be certainly in the mix there. Secretary of State Sarah Godlewski, who ran for Senate a couple of years ago as well. Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez, who flipped a key suburban area assembly seat a few years ago before she joined Evers as the lieutenant governor for his reelection campaign in 2022. You've got State Senator Kelda Roys, who ran against Evers in 2018, ran a strong race there. She has since been one of the ranking members on the powerful budget committee in the state Senate. Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley is somebody I think is a real rising star in the party. Younger guy, has been able to notch a whole lot of kind of under the radar wins as the county executive in Milwaukee. And then I guess there's also the possibility that Ben Wickler could turn around and run for statewide office. He just finished his term as the WISDEM's chair. And I had heard multiple times in reporting that he is interested in at some point running for statewide office, whether that would be for governor now or perhaps senator in 2028. We don't have a Senate race in Wisconsin during this upcoming midterm here. So we get a little bit of a break from from how these campaign cycles have been lately. But I think, there would be a number of others mentioned too. Milwaukee Mayor Cavalier Johnson made comments to NBC News this week saying that he could be, or his spokesman said that he could be in the mix if Evers decides not to run as well. So I think there is the kind of this next generation of Wisconsin Democrats who are waiting in the wings, for whenever that statewide race opens up. And I think it would be, and I think Democrats largely have avoided primaries to their detriment. I mean, we saw that with the presidential race last year when it was late in the game, and I was fine enough with the process, but I still don't think it was a particularly good one. I think I'd rather have the voters have their say. And as so many people are talking about, we need to figure out what's next for the Democratic Party, all these kind of post 2024 think pieces and whatever. I think it really needs to be the voters who choose our next direction forward. And I might have favorites from that list of candidates. From that I mentioned there as potential candidates for governor. But I think it's going to be how they, run those campaigns and how they connect with voters and how all that takes shape. And I think it needs to be the voters who make their voices clear and what direction the Democratic Party should take in Wisconsin. Because we all know that whatever happens first in Wisconsin, then it goes nationally from there.
Yeah. One other thing that jumped out from your piece to me that is actually quite similar, I think, to things here in Minnesota is kind of the sad states of the Republican Party in Wisconsin, where, you have a section devoted to who some of the Republicans might be who would run against the Democrat for the gubernatorial election next year. And one of the first ones you mentioned is Tom Tiffany, which it caused me almost to fall out of my chair because he's the rep. I live kind of in eastern Minnesota here, so if you just drive basically 15 minutes east, you're in Wisconsin. It's a really pretty area over there. There's a little town Osceola that has some really nice little cafes and There's a bowling alley that my kids like, and it's kind of hilly. It's right on the St. Croix River. But it's Tom Tiffany's district, and I know him mainly as a guy who goes on Newsmax 2 a lot, so not even Newsmax 1, but he's
Wait,
kind of
there's
the
a Newsmax
mainstay.
2? Hold
There's
on.
a Newsmax
I'm
2. Yep, and that's really,
TIL.
it's really a great place to mine for clips. One example this week was Pete Sessions, who's a Texas rep who CNN loves booking him as kind of like a serious Republican, with kind of like a traditional hawkish foreign policy. But then he was on Newsmax 2, I think just yesterday, the day before, basically saying that Biden's doctors should be imprisoned for covering up his mental condition. And so they kind of let the freak flag fly on Newsmax 2 in a way that you don't see on more mainstream outlets. But Tom Tiffany is on there all the time. And he's kind of this conspiratorial guy with a really thick Midwestern accent, just kind of a 60-ish year old white guy with really no charisma that's discernible. So maybe getting that a little bit. I mean, the one person you did mention who seems a little bit scary is Brian Style, I believe is how his last name is pronounced. Who he's younger and he's a little more telegenic. But you mentioned that it sounds like he is gearing up to run in his district again, given that he already has Trump's endorsement. But would Tiffany really be a guy who would be a serious contender to win a statewide race over there?
I mean, to the extent that he could win a statewide race, that I'm not really sure. He's won in a deep red district in northwestern Wisconsin. He was a state senator in Wisconsin for quite a while before he ran for Congress. And when Sean Duffy left his seat, so that was the guy that he took over from, is Sean Duffy, who's now taking care of space, I guess. And so I do wonder if Tom Tiffany ended up being the candidate, if it kind of just a shift in kind of the center of power for Republican politics in Wisconsin. For so long, it was the vaunted WOW counties, Washington, Ozaukee, and Waukesha counties, the 3 suburban counties that surround Milwaukee. That was the Republican stronghold in the state for so long. But now I think that stronghold is kind of shifting more to northern Wisconsin and some of the more rural areas in the state. And so I think if Tiffany were to win a primary like that, it could, really show that shift accelerating. But again, I think he does not have a whole lot of crossover appeal. I wonder if, somebody who's winning in a deep red district in Congress really can win statewide in Wisconsin, considering some of the views that he had. I mean, he was among the representatives who voted to overturn the 2020 election right after he was sworn into Congress there. So he's pretty far right on a lot of things. And then there are a couple of other candidates, one who just announced this week as well. So we had Washington County Executive Josh Schoeman announce a few weeks ago. And then this week, a guy by the name of Bill Berrien, who's a political outsider, business executive from the Milwaukee suburbs, he announced this week as well. So he was kind of a former Nikki Haley donor. And so I think some on the right were questioning, whether he really fits with like a Trump Republican Party. And so we're knocking him a little bit on that. But he, he's got a super PAC with more than $1 million. So he seems to be taking this run a little bit pretty seriously. And in his campaign videos, he really tried to tie himself to Trump in a lot of ways. So he's like, I'm a political outsider. Trump's a political outsider. I want to shake up Madison the way Trump is shaking up DC, I think was the line from his. So I think the Trump endorsement is going to be a really big factor in the Republican side of things. But I think overall, even if you take Evers, even if Evers decides not to run again, and I know incumbency is a powerful thing in Wisconsin. If you take that out, I think the Democratic bench is in a much stronger place than where Republicans are right now in those candidacies.
Yeah.
And there's also even been some talk that we'd get some retread candidates like Eric Hovde, who lost to Tammy Baldwin. He might even, there's been talk that he could run again for governor as well. So I just think the bench on the Republican side is not really particularly strong.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to follow up on one, related point to that, which is, to me, one of the most inscrutable results from, was it, okay, so Ron Johnson was up in 22, right? Was when he won most recently. And that was one where, you mentioned Tiffany, perhaps not being a great statewide candidate, but I think by any objective standard, I mean, you see Ron Johnson, and it's hard to imagine how he could get elected statewide. So, I guess I asked about Evers and kind of the secret sauce there. What is it that people like me are missing about Ron Johnson, where it's like, how is this guy, 3 times he's been elected now? He seems to have that seat for life, although I guess the 2022 was reasonably close. I mean, he's not unbeatable, but he just he wouldn't seem to me like a especially strong candidate, and yet there he is.
Yeah, I think, in a strange way, he has kind of become the most popular Wisconsin Republican for the party there. And I think he has, for whatever reason, been able to kind of thread the needle between like the Tea Party Republican business guy that he ran on when he defeated Russ Feingold in 2010 to the really kind of more conspiratorial minded MAGA Republican of the last few years. So he was just like, name a conspiracy theory, and Ron Johnson has signed on to it over the past few years, particularly, during COVID. But he's kind of been able to, bridge that support from like the, hey, let's cut spending Tea Party kind of guy of the kind of 2010s and of the Trump Republicans of more recent years. And he's I think in recent months, he's certainly been in the spotlight with the debates over the big ugly bill, saying that he was against it and, saying all these different things that he was, I can't believe how much spending is in this. And he's giving these interviews at the Milwaukee Press Club and like all these different things about how incredulous he is about this bill. And then he just turns around and votes for it without getting any of the concessions that he was asking for, which surprised absolutely no one in Wisconsin politics. And so he's just, for whatever reason, been able to kind of bridge that divide between kind of two different eras of Republicans. And yeah, I mean, I know he said he would only run for 2 terms. He ended up running for a third. Who knows what he's going to do in 2028. He's a pretty unpredictable guy.
Well, we apologize over here in Minnesota because he was born here and educated here. So
that's right.
It's your fault.
One of our worst exports. So my apologies to Wisconsin. Although, I want to apologize to Wisconsin, while also kind of questioning why you guys keep electing him. So there's no claim to go around there.
He has run in like the 3 most advantageous political cycles for Republicans. I mean, 2010, 2016, and 2022. He was able to run in some times that were, better for Republicans than others. So that's
and I mean, barely over 50% of the vote in his last 2 elections. That shouldn't be ignored. Well, we are talking Wisconsin politics with Dan Shafer of the recombobulation area. Dan, I want to look ahead to something else in 2027. Last year, for the first time, really in forever, Wisconsin held legislative elections for the state legislature on maps that were not GOP gerrymanders. The old GOP gerrymanders were thrown out by the state Supreme Court, and new maps that were very evenly divided, just like Wisconsin is, were used instead. And Democrats made some really important gains. And it's possible that Democrats could flip one or even both chambers next year. And if they do, and if they hold the governorship, that would give Democrats the holy grail, the so-called trifecta that would, I'm not even sure when the last time Democrats had the trifecta in Wisconsin was. I bet, I'm sure I'm curious to hear. But if they do regain the trifecta, what would you see as some of their top priorities in terms of legislation they'd want to pass come 2027?
Yeah, I think it's been since after the 2008 election was the last time there was a Democratic trifecta in Wisconsin. And then when Republicans won that trifecta back, they installed one of the most egregious partisan gerrymanders in the country. And it was until, you're right, last year that we had the first kind of post-gerrymander election. So that was all 99 districts in the Wisconsin State Assembly. Ended up breaking down with 54 Republicans won there, which the first time it was under 60 for, since the gerrymander was installed. And then in the state Senate, only half of the state senators were up under new maps. So with this coming election in 2026 is the first fully post-gerrymander election that we will have in Wisconsin. I think Democrats really like their odds, in particular of flipping the state Senate. They were able to flip 4 seats last year to shrink the margin to 18 to 15. There are 3 districts in the state Senate that have not yet been on the ballot in under the new maps that are districts that were won by both Kamala Harris and Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin last year. So I think it stands to reason that there is a good chance that Democrats could flip the state Senate. The assembly is going to be a little bit tougher, I think, comparatively, but there is a chance there as well. So if Democrats were able to emerge from 2026 with a trifecta, like you mentioned, I think it would be a couple different things. It would be one, it was just like there's so much low hanging fruit that we'd be able to address in Wisconsin that has just been waiting and not getting addressed at all. Like we're basically the only state in the Midwest that has not yet expanded Medicaid.
Yeah.
And, all of our neighbors are legalizing marijuana. There's universal background checks for guns. Go down the list of just like all these issues that have like 2/3 to 3/4 support per the like Marquette University Law School poll that have just not even seen a public hearing in the state of Wisconsin, much less come up for a vote on anything. So I think there would be a lot of that to be able to address. There's still aspects of the Scott Walker years that I think Democrats would look to unwind in many ways as well. And I think that part of the conversation about, who might be governor in 2026 is connected to this as well, because I don't think we have in Wisconsin, kind of like what you saw in Minnesota a couple of years ago when they had the 1-seat margin and were able to pass a ton of legislation with Tim Walz. And I don't think Tony Evers has never really been this like big, bold agenda type of politician either. So I think there, is real opportunity for somebody to bring a fresh approach, fresh ideas to what could be a really unique opportunity for Wisconsin Democrats if they were able to win that trifecta.
Did the lack of Medicaid expansion in Wisconsin, has that led to relatively high uninsured rates there? I haven't looked at those numbers, but it came up a lot in the context of Johnson's opposition to the bill, or opposition kind of in scare quotes because he went back and forth on it. But that was a little easier for him to rail against. He wanted deeper Medicaid cuts because that was kind of like a free square for him, given that Wisconsin hadn't expanded Medicaid. But I'm just curious if there's been any studies in terms of like the actual impacts of that vis-a-vis, a state like Minnesota, where, we do have, much more robust Medicaid and a relatively low uninsured rate.
Yeah, it's been a problem in Wisconsin, for sure. And not just the uninsured rate and things like that, but just like the missing billions of dollars that would have come to the state otherwise and would have helped the state budget in just a myriad of ways, right? And so like one of the things that happened last week in Wisconsin, with the budget process, they raced to get it passed to, not encounter some of the challenges on hospital reimbursements that could come from the big, beautiful bill. And they more than $1 billion in funding that could go towards Wisconsin hospitals. Well, they've just ignored doing that for Wisconsin hospitals for Medicaid expansion for more than a decade. I mean, we're one of only 10 states that has not yet done that. So, the same logic could certainly apply there. I'm not sure what's happening with the video on my end. Apologies if I'm contributing to that at all. I think there has been a real issue with that, and I think because of the bill, it's I think there was Tammy Baldwin's office put out some sort of numbers. I think it's like somewhere in the neighborhood of 280,000 Wisconsinites who stand to lose their Medicaid coverage because of the bill. So yeah, not great.
I think you guys can still hear me here probably, but I tried to reconnect my video. I was kind of flitting around like a character in the Matrix or something there for a minute. So
yeah, we were definitely glitching.
Yeah.
So we are talking with Dan Shafer about Wisconsin politics, and I should have mentioned this earlier. If you have a question for Dan or any of us, you just need to be a paid subscriber to any of our publications, and you can drop your question in the comment box for keeping an eye on those. Dan, before we let you go, there's one other Wisconsin election that I want to talk about, and it feels like we just got done with Aaron, we're still glitching out here.
Oh, it looks fine on my end. Am I glitching still?
Now I'm sorry for the technical difficulties, folks.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Okay.
I think maybe we'll Keep
I'll leave
you
the
off
video
video
off.
for a
Yeah.
moment.
All right.
But Dan, I want to ask you. We just got done with a massive state Supreme Court election, which was for all the marbles. We saw Elon Musk really eat dirt on that one. $25 million down the drain, massive landslide for the progressive candidate Susan Crawford. And boom, you have another state Supreme Court election coming up again in April. The stakes are a bit different for this one, so lay it all out for us.
Yeah, so last year's election with the state Supreme Court actually started a run of 5 consecutive years where we will have a state Supreme Court race on the ballot in the spring election in Wisconsin. So we don't get a whole lot of time off from having everything on the line, razor's edge elections in Wisconsin for, these big important offices. But the person who will be
Aaron,
up next year.
Aaron, I think you're still causing Dan to glitch, so I think you might need to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Dan. Go ahead.
All good. And so next year, it's a little bit different than we had the year before because it will be one of the conservative justices on the court, Rebecca Bradley. Her 10-year term on the court is ending. Former Democratic Assembly representative and recent circuit court judge, or I forget exactly what court she's been on, Dane County Judge Chris Taylor is the liberal candidate running there. She's already gotten the endorsement of all of the liberal majority members of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. So this is an opportunity for Taylor, if Taylor were to win this seat, would bring it from a 4-3 liberal majority on the court to a 5-2 liberal majority on the court. And Rebecca Bradley, we don't yet know if she's going to be running for re-election in that seat. There's been kind of chatter on both sides of this. I think we'll know a little bit more next week when the requirements for fundraising, the reports are required to come in, see if she's done any fundraising since she was elected in 2016. I had heard that she had basically kind of not done any of it in the meantime, but I think Chris Taylor just today announced that she raised more than $580,000 for her campaign, beating Susan Crawford's record from the same period from a year ago. So she's in a pretty strong position to flip that one. And Bradley, I must say, too, is she is the most far-right extreme member
she's fucking
of
insane.
The court. She is off the deep end on a whole number of things. So I think, having any kind of candidate challenge her in these types of, elections, it's a really good chance for Democrats to flip this and to, really expand that majority. And one of the 3 conservative justices on the court, Brian Hagedorn, has sided with liberals on a number of different occasions, most notably in the case to try to overturn the 2020 election. And so it would really be kind of like a 5-1 plus Hagedorn type of majority that liberals could enjoy if they flip that seat as well.
Well, we have been talking with Dan Shafer of the Recombobulation Area. You can find him on the Substack app or at therecombobulationarea.news. Dan, this has been a fascinating conversation. I didn't know that there was chatter about Rebecca Bradley possibly bailing, so definitely going to keep a close eye on that one. Impossible not to keep a close eye on Wisconsin at all times. So thank you so much for coming on Near and Rupar to share your insights with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Great chatting with you. Okay, let me see if this works now.
All right. That was very strange.
Yeah, it was kind of freaky looking there for a minute. Actually, some good news is that I just today rented an office space nearby, so I will have better internet going forward. Oh, I don't know if this was an internet-related issue. It might have been when I've guested on a couple Substack lives recently. It seems like there's been kind of weird stuff happening on some of these shows. So I don't know if their servers are strained because so many people are doing these shows now, or what's going on.
It's because everyone loves Near and Rupar so much. We overloaded them.
That's right. Yeah.
So, Aaron, I know that you've got to wrap up soon because there is a Trump presser that you've got to.
Yeah, I can maybe get because we were gonna talk a little Texas anyway. Obviously just a horrific situation, kind of unfathomable with some of the stories about, lives being lost. And so Trump is down there today. He's doing an aerial tour of the damage. And, as I'm looking at the monitor here, it's like a who's who. Ted Cruz is on screen right now. And pretty much any House Republican from Texas is also there. Trump is doing kind of a roundtable event. And, of course, this is kind of awkward because, Ted Cruz specifically inserted language into the reconciliation bill that cut like 150 million from federal government capabilities for beefing up forecasting, and then not only just weather forecasting but conveying information from
Right.
forecasts to citizens and residents, which is exactly what part of the issue was in this Texas situation. And, then you had the local Republicans in Texas who had many opportunities to install warning sirens in the hill country there, because that is a flood prone area, and didn't do it. Some of whom, there was an article I read of a House representative, a state one in Texas, who in the district, in the Kerr County area, who voted against statewide system that was actually on the table to install kind of a warning alert statewide, who voted against it, but now is saying in on record interviews that he regrets that vote. So there's a little bit of awkwardness, but it seems like Trump is basically going to surround himself with all the usual kind of sycophantic Republicans for this roundtable. So I don't really anticipate there being tough questions about this, although sometimes they do open it up for press questions, and so I'll be looking for that. It hasn't started yet, but that's one of the reasons I do have to duck out a little bit earlier than normal today.
So is Ted Cruz participating by Zoom from the Acropolis?
Yeah, no. I probably shouldn't really laugh, but no, he is there. I saw some reporting today in the timeline of that where the flooding occurred, I believe, the morning of July 4th. And then the next day, Ted was photographed in Greece on his family vacation. So, you can maybe cut him a little bit of slack if the idea was, well, he was doing a family vacation. No one could have foreseen this, and he got back as soon as possible. But it doesn't really seem like that was the case. It seems like he kind of followed through with at least part of the vacation and then came back. And of course, the background story here is that when there was a horrific winter storm in Texas in 2021, and people probably are familiar with that, Ted not only was tried to go to Mexico, I think, right after or as that was occurring, but then when he was busted doing that, that was one of my favorite political cover stories of all time, where he said that his children needed to fly to be with his wife in Mexico, and he was merely chaperoning them on the plane. If you remember, that was
right.
Yes, which people have kind of forgotten how ludicrous that was. But instead of just admitting that, I tried to duck out to take this little vacation with my family, his excuse was, no, I was actually just being a good dad and accompanying my children on the plane.
Sure.
Yeah. So.
It on one level, it's amazing that he somehow keeps ducking out of the state whenever there is a massive climate-related emergency. On the other hand, that's the whole point, that we are now experiencing these kinds of disasters on a more frequent basis, in large part because of the neglect of the problem of climate change that folks like Ted Cruz have spearheaded. And this kind of thing is gonna the disasters are gonna keep happening and keep getting worse and more frequent. And politicians are gonna be AWOL because there are just more disasters happening all the time.
Yeah, and it'd be one thing. It'd be bad enough if it was just kind of traditional Republicanism, where, we're skeptical about climate change. We don't really believe that meteorologists can predict what weather patterns are going to be in 20 or 30 years. But it's gone even like a step further now with the defunding of like the National Weather Service. It's taken kind of like a more almost active and aggressive form. They're not just denying climate science, but they're also kind of taking steps to, when the impacts of climate change hit, to make it harder for people to be safe, to get to higher ground if there's flooding, and just kind of endangering their constituents, in very kind of direct ways now. And then it's nauseating when you read some of these stories, like I was alluding to earlier, and it's the same pattern with Republicans over and over, where until something really bad happens directly to them, they don't really show empathy or care for others. And it's a problem that runs real deep, especially in a state like Texas, where the vast majority of the elected officials are Republicans. You'd hope that people maybe would reconsider electing these people every 2 or 4 years, but that's just where we're at. And in some ways, like I was saying, with the Doge cuts to the NWS, to some of the scientific research surrounding climate change, it's even more insidious now than I think it was 5-10 years ago.
There was an official in that part of Texas who a number of years ago when they were considering putting in some kind of flood alert system. And he said that he wasn't interested in supporting such a project because it would only benefit crazy people from Houston who build homes right by the water. And then there's this unreal quote. This guy, Buster Baldwin, he died a few years ago. He said, "The thought of our beautiful Kirk County having these damn sirens going off in the middle of the night, I'm going to have to start drinking again to put up with y'all." I mean, he just doesn't want to hear sirens, doesn't want to spend money on sirens that would save people's lives. It's just gotten so bizarre.
Yeah.
The normal steps that you might take as a civilized society to protect people from unnecessary harm and death, and they don't even want to hear sirens. Really?
Right. And, you could take it even further with, the desire to gut FEMA, to kick all of these disaster response back to the states. And Josh Stein, who is the governor of North Carolina, I thought he really summarized it nicely. He was on CNBC yesterday and he talked about how, a state like North Carolina, they don't have, huge storms like Helene was last year. That's not a yearly event for them. But when you look at the country as a whole, there is a storm like that, or an earthquake or a hurricane, every year some state is hit by this. And so it doesn't make sense for states, each of them, to have like a fully developed emergency response team, like a mini FEMA. That's why
Right.
you get the scale with FEMA. You get,
Yep.
you get a national service that can, can kind of adapt to different states and different needs. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so many different, again, from, just the gutting of the National Weather Service to the gutting of FEMA. We're seeing a very direct kind of outcome of that in Texas right now. And so it will be kind of interesting today to see how Republicans try to kind of gloss over this. And I am hoping that Trump will open up his event for press questions, because that's one of the few opportunities where he might actually get a tough question. Although, even the press pool now is more and more stocked with kind of the far right, Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend, Brian Glenn, or Fox News reporters. He selects the press pool at this point. So you might get like a CNN reporter in there, you might get a New York Times reporter, but he's gotten more and more kind of effective at really weeding out anyone who is willing to ask him a tough question.
Speaking of FEMA, have you seen these reports about the head of FEMA just having totally disappeared off the face of the earth?
I have not seen that. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I don't even remember the guy's name. I mean,
Hmm.
that's par for the course with these kind of
Yeah.
random Trump officials who have no profile and no background. But yeah, usually FEMA heads, when there is a disaster, they want to be visible at the scene of the disaster to demonstrate to people that they care, that they're doing something, that they're trying to help and trying to save lives and reconstruct lives. And that's just totally absent from the fascistic worldview. And it is particularly wild to me, and you alluded to this earlier, that we are accustomed to seeing dismissiveness or outright hostility from Trump and his minions when there's a disaster in a place like California. But this is in
Yeah.
Texas, and now I know that Trump has been far more solicitous toward Texas than he ever has been toward California. But still, there is still a tremendous blitheness and a refusal to accept any responsibility for what's happened here, even though it's affected their base.
Oh, yeah. And, that's actually a really telling contrast, I think, where, if you remember the wildfires, which occurred just before Trump's inauguration, but they were obviously still kind of struggling with, the response to that after his inauguration. There was a lot of talk at that time about, forest management in California and what Gavin Newsom had done to drop the ball in Trump's eyes and make those fires way worse. All the talk about the water from Canada that Trump had. And you contrast that with the solicitousness that he has for Texas Republicans. It's a really kind of stark illustration of how Trump doesn't even pretend to be the president for all of America. He's basically the president of the red states. And when disasters like this happen that affect blue states, it's basically like an extortion opportunity, or an opportunity for him to try and extract concessions in response for an emergency response that would have been standard issue under any normal president.
Well, I wish we had more positive notes to head out on, but sometimes we just have to confront the reality that we're presented with. But I hope that Trump does get at least one or two hard questions that help expose him, because I think last year's election, a big problem was that it was easy for the media to play along with his BS promises, and for voters to want to believe them because that's what they were being told, that Trump was going to do X, Y, and Z, and he cared about all of these things that he manifestly didn't care about. And when he is put on the spot and makes it clear that no, he actually doesn't really care about certain people, then I think that goes a long way to helping educate voters about what hell Trump has unleashed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm there with you, and we didn't have time to get into today, but you're seeing kind of an analogous thing with the markets right now and Trump's tariffs, where there's like a belief, they want to believe, investors, that he doesn't really mean it, that August 1st is going to come and go, and he's not going to implement 35% tariffs on Canada, 30% tariffs on Japan. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of been a constant with Trump, is sort of wish casting, kind of projecting what you want him to be instead of what he really is. And when you see a storm like this in Texas, you see kind of what the outcome of that sort of governance is, and it's not pretty. I mean, the best case for Republicans is to kind of cover up what's actually happening there and suppress information from getting out, rather than really defend their conduct on the merits, or try to do better next time. I mean, we see it after a lot of the rhetoric that you see after mass shootings is kind of what you're seeing in Texas.
Yeah,
this idea that
yeah.
we can't politicize this, we need to focus on recovery, and then by the time 3 months from now, the people have kind of forgotten about it, there'll be another disaster where they can say it's too soon to really engage in the substance of what's going on there. So yeah, I mean, I regret this not a happier note to end on today, but I know next week, when correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to have Joe on again as the guest host, as I am out. So I'm sure you and Joe will have a much more lighthearted and lively banter.
Well, I got to belay that, Aaron. I decided, actually, since you're taking off, you know what? I'm going to take off too.
Oh,
So,
okay. Well, I regret bringing it up. I'm sorry. Well,
no, that's quite all right. I told Joe, but I think I failed to tell you that I was going to follow your lead. So, thank you to everyone tuning into Near and Rupar today. We have more than 650 folks tune in to the show. Really appreciate it. Like we just said, though, we are going to be off next week, but we will be back again in 2 weeks' time on Friday, July 25th. And I think we will then be getting back to our regular every week schedule from that point on. But I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. And Aaron, I hope you have a fantastic day off next Friday, too.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And David, I'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
See you.